really hilarious things in the ongoing narrative of Bayonetta 3 being a bad game is this weird assertion among fanboys that the story wasn't clear about where Viola was going as a character, right? Like a lot of people made the incorrect assumption that like, oh, she's gonna be the new protagonist and four, like that's what the game is gonna be about. Like it's gonna be like they're gonna do this. Like they're gonna replace Bayonetta with this new chick, and like, people like created this really fake like controversy even after the developers confirmed that Bayonetta would be returning in future games. Like there are plenty of ways she can come back. Okay, like it's not that big of a deal. Okay. But like this kind of goes into what I was saying about like Bayonetta 3 in general, where it really feels like the people who are complaining about it, Metroid Dread, and No More Heroes 3 are really people who are just desperately trying to downplay every Nintendo game that comes out. Right? So it's not just Bayonetta 3, it's not just No More Heroes 3, it's not just Here's the Kingdom, it's everything, right? And I do think this is a really interesting example of that because nobody, none of these people were saying this about Devil May Cry 4 and 5, right? Where Dante was straight up replaced by Nero, right? Where they established this character that nobody likes, nobody cares about, nobody wants to see in favor, like instead of like the iconic video game protagonist Dante, right? Like Nero was always a terrible idea. And I think anybody that wasn't like a hardcore fanboy would have seen that, that understood that like Nero was always designed to be like Itsuno's like replacement character for Dante, trying to get Kamiya's creation out of the way so he can like mold Devil May Cry into being something it isn't, right? Like it was the character was made he's essentially like the Zero of the Mega Man of like the Devil May Cry franchise, right? Where like Keiji Inafune had nothing to do with the creation of Mega Man, but like because he created Zero and because he was like involved with the franchise for so long, he kind of managed to take it over until like he left the company after Mega Man 10, right? So it's a similar situation here, right? Where Itsuno just kind of has this this character that he needs to shill in order to keep himself relevant, to keep his influence at Capcom. And most people don't want to admit it, right? Most people don't like admitting that Nero was intended to replace Dante. Meanwhile, the same people are pretending that Viola is replacing Bayonetta, and that's why Bayonetta 3 was a bad game. Like it was a completely ridiculous statement in and of itself. Especially if you actually play 3, because if you compare Devil May Cry 5 and 4 to Bayonetta 3, you'll see that like 3 still prominently features Bayonetta as a major character, right? Viola is just like an optional, is just a side character, is just a character you play as in certain story segments, right? She's not the protagonist by any means. Meanwhile, like Devil May Cry 4 and 5, you both of those games, you start off as playing Nero, right? You don't start playing as Dante until well into them, right? 4, you don't start playing as Dante until the halfway mark. And by that point, you're like going back through the original game, right? So you're doing all the things that Nero already did as Dante, right? So like Dante's gameplay comes off as stale and rehashed compared to Nero's, right? And then 5, it tries presenting Nero as like the protagonist. Like it tries writing off Dante. It tries like saying some ridiculous thing about him like going off with Virgil. So like neither of them can interfere with Nero's adventures in Devil May Cry 6. Like that's the implication, right? Like that was very clear with Devil May Cry 5, right? It was a joke what they pulled with that game. And nobody really wants to there's been this very stubborn refusal from the community to admit that DMC5 isn't very good, right? Most people have been like in denial about this since the game came out, but people say it's the best Devil May Cry game ever, that it's one of the best action games of all time, that it's really not all that remarkable. It's really like kind of below average. I wouldn't put it up there with anything I enjoy. Like it's just kind of a basic action game and one that's like I don't know. I'd put that up there with mid-tier GameCube action series, the kind of thing you would get from like licensed games and stuff like that. Like it legit is that like level of quality here. Like nobody wants to admit it. Like all anybody does is just like clap like seals every time that like Dante appears on screen, right? Like it's like that is the Devil May Cry audience, right? They don't think, they don't play the games, they don't really have any real conception of like any real idea of like what makes other action games better than Devil May Cry. They just kind of unilaterally declare Devil May Cry as the best because they've never really played anything else, right? I feel almost I am very thoroughly convinced at this point that the people who praise Devil May Cry 5 but hate Bayonetta 3 have never actually played Bayonetta 3. Like every video analysis I've seen, every like conspiracy, every like Shizo 4chan post, like it all comes off the same way. It all comes off as just stale, empty complaining from people who just have no idea what they're talking about, right? Like every time the subject comes up, like you just end up laughing about it. And of course, there are like other examples of this. I think the whole like Yuri thing is kind of another blatant example, but like it really does come off as if the vast majority of the Bayonetta audience, like the people who talk about it online, are people who are intent on downplaying it, who are intent on aggressively pretending the games are not good because they are Nintendo exclusives, right? Like that's basically what it comes down to. Like we didn't see this happen with the original Bayonetta, right? That wasn't really a thing back then, but it's become a thing as the series has become more and more associated with Nintendo, and it's becoming increasingly unlikely that two or three will ever come to other platforms. It's sad, honestly, to see so many people just obsessively try and convince us that these that that Bayonetta 3 is a bad game. And it's a narrative that won't stick for sure. It's kind of remarkable to me seeing like how much enthusiasm 2 has been getting in recent years. And a big part of that is because for the first time ever, you're allowed to talk about 2 without being attacked. Like it doesn't feel all that long ago that like 2 was being down was getting attacked and things like that. And I confess that I am part of that movement because I don't think 2 is all that great. But like at the same time, as much as I don't like 2, it's still better than any Devil May Cry game. Bayonetta 2 is better than every single DMC, and that's not even getting into the good Bayonettas. Like 2 is the worst, like by a wide margin, right? And it's still better than every Devil May Cry game. And I can tell you that with confidence because I have actually played all of the games that we're talking about today.